The whole Eklavya experience is both an experience of critiquing textbook writing and then adding to it by also creating a body of texts. I think that's been very fascinating, and you can also see that the way the attack is coming on the textbooks is narrowly focused on what is seen as the textbook the process of textbook writing for syllabi in schools. But actually, there is a larger problem also, and I think we need to address that to some extent. Let me begin by saying that among the people who needed to actually dismantle the nationalist paradigm were the feminists. And they were forced to do it because as the movement began in parts of this round of the women's movement that we had, when it began in places like Delhi and the urban cities and so on, basically around gender, the fault line of gender, one of the things that we were immediately confronted by was the informal belief that we had this great ancient past, everything was fine. You would even have examinations which say India, there was equality, we had patriarchy. That is, we had your examination answers would sometimes include saying the great Vedic age had patriarchy and it had equality. Equality didn't seem to include question. I mean, within patriarchy you could have equality. That seemed to be the paradigm. Patriarchy was seen as a positive, normative institution rather than as a problematic institution. And we were confronted literally by the Altekaren paradigm. You know, this Altekare's great India, and this construction of ancient India as being glorious is very strongly internalized in the writing of gender. Once you open this up, and I think to that extent, James Mill did something, but then our nationalists took off on it, and they loved it. They loved the James Millian approach because they could actually do the same thing. So Altekar wrote his history within that framework, and at the end of the day, it would naturally lead to great ancient past, Parda in the medieval ages, and then modernity and the nationalists bringing it up in some form, some kind of equality. So I think that there was a serious fault in the way in which the nationalist paradigm was projected onto the writing of history, and it has had consequences. So we've actually had to battle, what we're seeing as today's backlash. We've had to battle this. It's a 200-year history, or at least, it's actually 1800s and onwards is when you begin to get this paradigm in which great ancient past was being constructed, and everybody was participating in that. And I think the greatest thinkers, I think, were involved with that also. So I think that so there's a larger problem, and it is not only confined to the government of the day deciding what should be in a textbook. It's larger than that because it circulates amongst the middle class, upper caste public that basically constitutes the public sphere. So they decide what is acceptable and what is not. I think in the second wave, I'd like, it was nice to hear the experience of Eklavya and the attempt to bring in critical questions. We were all trying to do that. I think we tried to bring both gender and caste into the syllabus, and it was a tough job because our teachers, the school teachers, were basically, again, a repeat of the same groups of people who constitute the middle class and who also constitute the teaching community generally. So the teaching community comes with its own biases, and they have a great difficulty in actually thinking afresh on certain questions. So I do remember that I presented one of my Sita papers there, and it caused complete havoc, because everybody said, how can you, I mean, the critique, multiple versions of Sita and the versions in which actually Ramrajya was not so great, is something that was seen as it unsettled the beliefs of the others. Caste, on the other hand, was also discussed. But because school teachers were now, through the policy of recruitment, were included a number of Dalit teachers, that session was actually much more interesting, because they would slug it out amongst themselves. The teachers themselves were slugging it out amongst themselves. So it was not a simple process of upper caste, middle class, dominant in the discussions as far as the class was concerned. So that was also quite interesting. I can, this can come up in the discussion, I don't need to do it over here. So for instance, one of the other issues is this writing, this gender, when we did start to write it, it was not easy. It was not easy. I have to tell you that my book on Ramabai, which I labored, I mean, I actually retaught myself. I went from early India to modern India, simply to write about gender, and to write critically about gender. And when I did that, not a single, and this is a complaint that I will put against everybody, Bhadralok jo hai na, they will only write what they believe is acceptable. Not a single male scholar reviewed that book of mine. Not a single male scholar. Kisi ne nahi kiya. Dumped it in the dump house. Then, okay, anyway. Now, where I get into the controversy, and that's interesting from point of view of what's happening today, also equally, an attempt was made by the Sanskrit, new Sanskrit teacher, who was also participating in this syllabus making for the Sanskrit, and she was a Sanskrit scholar, Sanskrit MA, interested in gender. She tried to bring Ramabai into the Sanskrit textbook. Perfectly valid thing to do. It set up terrible anxiety, because she had become Christian. How can you include in the school textbook, in the Sanskrit school textbook, never mind that she was called Pandita Ramabai Saraswati, she could not be introduced into the syllabus, because that was extremely, unsettling as far as syllabi was making. So school syllabi has been highly tweaked and highly controlled, because it shouldn't open up questions too seriously from the thinking end, let's put it like that. And then just more recently, and that's amusing, my book, Gendering Caste Through a Feminist Lens, it's my least quote-unquote academic piece of work. It's also my most popular work as far as circulation is concerned. That got put into the Delhi University, those general courses that were being created. It was put over there. It's been pulled off, because I'm dealing with caste and gender and endogamy and the reproduction of caste, and that's not to be encouraged as far as the syllabus is concerned. So that's gotten pulled off, and the bottom line in all this is this entertaining story about, the 4 young women went off to see Jack. Who's the guy who's that Twitter fellow? Uska naam kya hai? Jack something or the other, no? Jack Dorsey. So so 4 Dalit women in America went off to meet him, and they held a placard which said, "Smash Brahmanical Patriarchy." He thought some 4 young women who come and they're having themselves photographed. He was very happy. He had himself photographed and so on. It went all over. My God, Hindu male upper caste in North America, hysteria. They went for this man and they had to, he quickly pulled himself off that. So it came off the whatever. But its consequence was that the piece that I had written in the EPW called Conceptualizing Brahmanical Patriarchy, that suddenly got thousands of hits afterwards because it caught up. It caught up, and that was a kind of nice little addition to the story. So, censorship, manipulating, it's very dangerous. You can't talk about caste, you can't talk about gender, you can't talk about endogamy, you can't talk about violence, which is generated by the marriage system. There are a number of things that you can't talk about. It's not acceptable because it's very inconvenient today as far as the dominant thinking upheld from the top is concerned. So, the attack is going to come not only in school syllabi, in formal university syllabi, but it's coming all over. And there are varieties of ways in it's happening, and we have to find ways to actually keep that critical thinking going, whatever the scenario. I think with that we should open up to the discussion, because I'm sure people have been sitting there and waiting for, for the questions we ask. So this is your moment.